welcome everyone to No Longer Enslaved, where we have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. This is episode 5, Social and Emotional Learning, C blank T in Disguise. Now, I have to use some code language so I don't get any strikes, which is a bit unfortunate that we even have to think about it, but let's have some fun with it. I was thinking about the years that my husband and I were in youth ministry together. We would plan these car rallies and all the clues were encoded. And so it kind of brings me back to those days. So we'll just have a little fun with it. And I'm certain that you'll figure out what it is I'm trying to say with my coded language. So here we go. Now, with the coded language, I'm going to use synonyms and also words that rhyme. So I will be talking about social emotional learning, but also crucial face theory. Okay, crucial face theory. That's my coded language. And I will abbreviate that CFT. Now, I'm certain you have already figured out what it is I'm talking about. There will be other points in what I speak about today that I'll use some more coded language, but I'll try and describe it first. So as we dive into social emotional learning, you may want to take notes because I'm going to go into some depth and connect dots that maybe you're unaware of. But if you're not listening to me in a place where you can take notes, have no fear. I have just written an article on social emotional learning, and it's on my website. So you can go to my website, which is nolongerenslaved.com. Go to the articles tab and pull down the first article there, which is my most recent article. And I go into a lot more depth than I'll have time to today. And also I have all the resources and references for you there. I will also link that in the description box below to make it easier for you. Okay, you ready? We're going to dive in a bit. So just from the get-go, I want you to be aware that SEL, social emotional learning, is CFT in disguise. It's already being taught in our schools. And so that's why I want to make us aware of this. You know, the public outcry over CFT has caused the globalists to have to turn to a page in their old playbook, and that is obfuscate the truth. And they had to insert the same constructs as CFT in different curriculums and avoid using the term face. Now, face again is a code word. They had to avoid using the term face in the curriculum so that parents would have no clue what they're doing. And that's why I think it's so important, that we educate each other on what is social emotional learning and where did it come from and how did it get into our schools. Now, I have to say, I owe some of my awakening to the agenda behind SEL to a very brave middle school teacher from Draper Parks Middle School. His name, at the beginning of the year, resigned. Beginning of the school year, this school year, 2021, he resigned from his position. He was a band teacher, and he was very concerned about what he was asked to teach regarding SEL. Now, he was only given Unit 1, to my understanding, and that's what he was instructed to teach. But as he began looking into it further, he just became more and more concerned. And so he sent a letter out to parents upon his resignation and then also the school administration. And I want to read some excerpts from his letter because it helps awaken us to some of the concerns with social emotional learning. Okay, so this was in his letter to parents. He says, I think that most people will agree that the skills which the second step curriculum is supposed to teach students are good and helpful. But the way that these skills are presented in the second step curriculum is concerning enough to me that I cannot, in good conscience, present the material to my students. Material which teaches students that their parents are roadblocks to their goals. Material which contains propaganda and encourages students to become activists, among other things. I am especially uncomfortable with the anti-family undertone I have found in second step curriculum. Now, he did get a little bit more specific with the school administration, and I'll just read a few of his concerns. Like he went through a lot. And in my article on SEL, I have a link that you can follow in that article to his letters if you want to read them in more depth. But he says, with the first day of school coming, I have only taken time to go through the first unit of the 7th grade course, which is what I would be teaching. I've read all of the material, teacher's notes and scripts, student handouts, scope and sequence, and the lessons which are presented to the class in Unit 1. So he's letting the school administration know that, upon his review of Unit 1, these are some of his concerns. So in Lesson 1, he has, there's an introductory video. And there is propaganda. Now, I'm going to use code language again, so I'm going to reverse the order of these letters in this acronym. So there's MLB, propaganda, in this video. And he says, I'm happy to discuss being just and helping to end suffering. But when the only visual cue given for students to consider as the narrator speaks about the hardship of dealing with the injustice and suffering in the world is the video footage from MLB protest, it is biased, it's propaganda. Propaganda has no place in our schools. And then in Lesson 4, he shares a concern he has. He says, a discussion about reaching our goals and identifying and planning for roadblocks that might keep them from reaching a goal. The lesson gives the following scenario. A student has a goal. The student's parents say that the goal is not an appropriate goal for the student. The lesson asks the students to decide if the parents are an internal roadblock or an external roadblock. Teaching students that their parents are roadblocks is not acceptable. This is anti-family. So when I first read his letters, it began to awaken me, and I realized, okay, it's time to wake up and dig deep. What is social and emotional learning? So let's dive in a little bit more. So it first was developed by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, otherwise known as CELT. Now, CELT was founded in 1994 by educators, philanthropists, researchers, practitioners, and child advocates, and among which is the author who wrote Emotional Intelligence, Daniel Goleman. Also, you have philanthropist Eileen Rockefeller Growald, that is also one of the founders of CELT. Now, according to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, there are 3 domains of SEL, and they are cognitive skills, emotional competencies, and social and interpersonal skills. So let me read what's described here, and this is straight from the website. Cognitive skills include executive functions as working memory, attention, control, and flexibility, inhibition and planning, as well as beliefs and attitudes that guide one's sense of self and approaches to learning and growth. Then for emotional competencies, it says enable one to cope with frustration, recognize and manage emotions, and understand others' emotions and perspectives. And then finally, social and interpersonal skills are to enable one to read social cues, navigate social situations, resolve interpersonal conflicts, cooperate with others, and work effectively in a team and demonstrate compassion and empathy towards others. Now, as a psychologist, I think that these are wonderful at first glance. In fact, these are the areas that I would work with most of my clients on. And so naturally, I think that these constructs are important. But the context in which these are addressed is critical because it can either lead to transformation or indoctrination. Now, within the context of therapy, psychologists are bound by ethical standards in which we cannot insert our own biases into the therapeutic relationship. So, for example, it would be unethical for me to try and persuade my clients, whether indirectly or directly, to adopt my worldview. And psychologists, social workers, and school counselors are all licensed professionals. And so we're trained to conduct psychological interventions, whereas teachers are not. Now, if we were to cross ethical boundaries, we could lose our license. And so psychologists and licensed counselors were trained to be able to create a safe and therapeutic environment in which to explore these domains. So that can lead to transformation. Now, within the context of a classroom, teachers aren't bound by the same ethical standards as professional counselors or psychologists. And so they don't have the same guardrails that keep them from inserting their own biases into the curriculum. In fact, it's actually become common practice for teachers to try and persuade students to adopt their worldview. And, some teachers will do this in a more subtle way. They might have a politically charged poster or flag hanging in their classroom, but not ever really directly describe that poster or flag. Then there's other teachers who are not so subtle and will actually bully students to adopt their worldview and to bring them into submission. And that's very concerning. Now, after doing some digging, I discovered the roots of SEL extend back to the United Nations through UNESCO. Now, UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And UNESCO considers itself the czar of education for the entire world. It's the primary supporter of the comprehensive sexuality education. Now that's a mouthful, so I'm going to abbreviate that CSE. So comprehensive sexuality education. So it's our sex ed. That's CSE. Now, what we need to understand is that CSE partners with International Planned Parenthood. And through this, CSE teaches our children as young as 5 that, quote, people can show love for other people through touching and intimacy. People show love and care for other people different ways, including kissing, hugging, touching, and sometimes through sexual behavior. When I read that on UNESCO's website, I got nauseous. Do you realize what they're doing? They are grooming our children to become victims of, I don't even know if I can say this word, pedo stuff. It's disgusting. Now, another thing to be aware of is CSE also teaches our children ages 9 through 12 that masturbating is not harmful, but should be done in private. Now, again, to share my psychological perspective, I have quite a different perspective than CSE is offering. Masturbation can be harmful because it can lead to other sexualized behavior, including sexual addiction. And it doesn't appear, from what I could tell from the CSE curriculum, that they are addressing the negative aspects of masturbating. They're simply normalizing it. And so let me be blunt here. CSE is promoting sexual stimulation with prepubescent children. This is not okay. Now, how does this comprehensive sexuality education filter into our schools? Now, once again, it comes through UNESCO, but UNESCO educates the world through the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Here's yet another acronym, OECD. So the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Now, this might come as no surprise, but OECD also partners with the International Planned Parenthood. They're also a member of the UN Global Compact, which signifies that they have a commitment to taking these strategic actions towards the advancement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, it's also important that we understand that OECD is funded in part by the the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also the George Soros Open Society Foundation. And what OECD intends to do is to cultivate within our children this reevaluation of their values that they gain from us as their parents and in their families. And what OECD wants to do is uproot gender and cultural stereotypes. So they want to get our children to constantly question these values that they've learned in the family. Now, let me also make you aware of what's called transformative SEL. Now, transformative SEL is crucial phase theory. And there are 48 SEL programs that meet the standards for transformative SEL. And some of the common ones are second step, the second step curriculum for elementary school, and the second step curriculum for middle school. And then they also have a second step for high school. Also, another program called Harmony SEL or Leader in Me. So these are some of the more common, but like I said, there's 48 different curriculums within the school districts across our nation that are transformative SEL. And here's how CELT defines transformative SEL on their website. They say it is a means to better articulate the potential of SEL to mitigate the educational, social, and economic inequities that derive from the interrelated legacies of racialized cultural oppression in the United States and globally. Transformative SEL represents an as yet underutilized approach that SEL researchers and practitioners can use if they seek to effectively address issues such as power, privilege, prejudice, discrimination, social justice, empowerment, and self-determination. Now, some of the core features of transformative SEL include enhancing and foregrounding social and emotional competencies needed for civic engagement and social change, such as reflecting on personal and social identities, examining prejudices and biases, interrogating social norms, disrupting and resisting inequities, and co-constructing equitable and just solutions. Another core feature is prioritizing students' individual and collective agency to take action for more just schools and communities. Now, you can see in these core principles, there is a prioritization within transformative SEL that students engage in civil action. So the question is, what kind of civil action are they encouraging students to engage in? Now, again, I'm going to use a little code language here, but are they steering students to participate in MLB protests or Mantifa rallies? Now, recently, Project Veritas, they were able to uncover a high school teacher in Sacramento that gives his students extracurricular or extra credit for attending right-wing rallies as Mantifa provocateurs. And he was caught on camera saying, I have 180 days to turn them, meaning students, into revolutionaries. This is our wake-up call, folks. We have to remain vigilant as parents and grandparents and as, caring individuals. Aristotle once said, all who have meditated on the art of governing mankind are convinced that the fate of empires depends on the education of the youth. Well, Hitler, Lenin, and Mao all understood this. And so do the global elites that are running the United Nations. See, our children are our greatest treasure. They are our future. And so we must fight with everything that we have in us to free them from indoctrination and mind control. And I want to encourage you, get involved in your kids' schools. Know what's going on. Go to the school board meetings. Realize that you can opt your child out of SEL. In fact, that's what I've done. And I will link below an opt-out form. Now it was developed in Utah and it's using Utah codes, but you can look at each of your individual states and adapt this opt-out form accordingly. But we need to take a stand, and we need to hold these teachers and school board members accountable and let them know what our boundaries are with what they're teaching our children. And I want to share a quote again from Ronald Reagan. And my hope is that it inspires and motivates us. He says, "Freedom is never more than one generation from extinction." You see, a choice lies before us. Are we going to be the generation that allows freedom to die? Or are we going to be the generation that is known to turn back our country from the precipice of destruction? I believe in us. You see, we the people, we are a force to be reckoned with, and we can do this. Godspeed, and thanks for joining me.